it's my privilege to introduce to you the queen of attachments, my good friend Deborah Gray. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you for attending this conference, and I want to thank each one of you for the contribution that you make to the lives of children. I was very interested in attending this conference because of the subject matter at hand, and when they asked me about a title for it, I said Children's Attachment and Child Welfare, seeing through to the heart of the matter, because it is so hard to get to the essentials, isn't it? When we're working with children, we're working with their attachments and all the complexity of it. How do we make decisions on their behalf? Because the matter of the truth is that we know that the decisions that we're going to make are going to hurt people, they're going to stress people, and if we make those decisions incorrectly, then we're going to fundamentally impair children's functioning on into their growing up years. So it's really a high-stress tightrope that we walk as a group. And what I'm hoping we can do today is talk about some of those fundamentals, and then I've put in some very practical implications for how we make decisions for children, how we treat the parents who are parenting children who have such complex needs. So let's move through. I want to talk a little bit about the context in which we're operating too. Our current rate of adoption is about 130,000 children a year. In 1970, that was about 170,000 kids a year. What's different is that in 1970, about 90% of those kids were infant adoptions placed pretty quickly after birth. So we had some issues around identity adoption. We've always had some prenatal exposure, but we've never operated with the degree of complexity in the area of child welfare as we have today. The statistic in 2003 is that about 50,000 children were adopted from foster care. I haven't updated this slide, but the current rate that we were looking at, for the last year where we were able to pull the rates together, the states don't have ways of collecting information that are standard, so you have to do some analysis. But it was at about 53,000 kids a year being adopted. And the average age is 7 years old, median age 6.1 years old. So we're talking about kids who are coming into their families quite a bit later. And if you look at what we've done as a society, everybody in this room, everyone in the country should be really taking a bow, because our rate until about 1998 was staying at just around the mid-30s. 36,000 was the rate in 1998. And so over the last 5 years, we've sustained, actually 7 years now, we've sustained this rate of adoption at a much higher rate. But it's putting a tremendous amount of pressure on all our systems. How many here are feeling that pressure? It's enormous, isn't it? Because suddenly we've got to come up with post-placement services for these families. Or we have children who are very complex moving into families, and the families were like, whoa, what happened to my regulation? What happened to the dinner hour? I used to be able to maybe volunteer at Awanas, but suddenly I'm so flattened that I just send this kid to Awanas and I don't answer the phone. It's just my life has fundamentally changed. We're going to talk a little bit about what that's like for kids. Also, I feel like we need to mention there are 119,000 children waiting to be adopted. That's about our current level. And the rate at which kids are leaving the foster care system, coming into the foster care system, is remaining pretty consistently. Their average age is 8.6, median 8.7. If you get to be 10 years old in the foster care system, your chances of being adopted really drop down to a very low rate. So when we have kids who are coming into our system early, the sooner we can move them into adoptive families, the better. Or even if they're coming later. But this is getting older in the foster care system pretty much means you run the risk as the years go on of being raised in out-of-home care. So It's important to note that 88% of the children adopted from the foster care system qualify for a special needs assistant package. This is really fundamental for us to understand, because when we have children who are being adopted from our systems today, we need to be able to designate those kids as special needs kids. Not because we like the terms, but we need to get the families ready for what lies ahead. What we know is that when families are parenting special needs kids, they need a lot more resources. Their rate of depression is higher. Their rate of social isolation is higher. And so we are really going to have to help them get ready for the road ahead. They did an interesting study, and they looked at the rate at which the mothers of special needs kids aged in their neural systems. And they found out that the end of some of the neuronal material just kind of flattened out over time. You know, it breaks, and then we regrow, break, regrow, break, regrow. But instead, for these moms, it was frayed out like the end of an old shoelace. And so they were basically frying their neural systems. Well, what's interesting is if you look at the rate of the aging of the neural systems of the moms who are actually doing okay, we found out that they had a resource group, people who understood them, people who supported them. They hadn't become isolated. They weren't judged. In other words, they had this incredible support group that continued to affirm and authentically see them so they didn't feel they were so alone with matters in the world. I was talking to a woman who was talking about the grief that she was feeling as she approached the first year of parenting her little girl. And as we were discussing it, she just started to cry for a minute. She said, "I don't know why that caught me when you said I'd find a mentor for you, someone who was further up the road." I said, "Well, don't you find it's a rather lonely course?" And she said, "That's what it was. And it was just the thought that I wouldn't have to be so alone with the feelings that I have, that are these grief and ambivalent feelings towards my own daughter that even my mother can't comprehend." So this is just the overview. Don't worry. I'll get much more practical in a minute. But I want to lay the big picture out here for you, because those are the things that undo these individuals. Almost all of the kids have had experience with one or more of the following: prenatal exposure, neglect, abuse, including emotional, and as the witnesses of violence and loss. And by the way, just a plug in here, if the kids that you're working with have seen violence to the primary caretaker, the evidence from our research is it's just as bad, and in fact a little worse, than as if that violence happened to the child themselves, just so we can assess that loss. And we need to also look at what neglect and trauma is doing for our kids. If we look at the Casey Family Foundation's work that was done, Harvard and Casey Family Foundation did the Northwest Foster Care Alumni Study. They looked at kids who had left foster care. They could be in foster care, they could be kinship care, they could be adopted. But we found that our foster care graduates had double the rate of PTSD as Vietnam vets, 5 times the rate of anxiety as the rest of the population. Their mental health needs were enormous. About a third of them had such significant mental health needs that would impair their ability to work. Okay, so what are we missing here as a group? I mean, we've done a lot of things right, but we're missing a lot too. And that is a matter of fact why I accepted this invitation to travel and come see all of you. So we need to pay attention to attachment, attunement, and self-regulation, because what we want when kids are leaving care, when they're going out into the adult world, is that they know how to form secure attachments themselves. We don't want the next generation, do we? You know, it's like the slide that Bruce Perry was showing. We cannot sustain this rate of kids coming in so damaged just as a society. Even if we didn't care, in a microwave about the kids themselves, we could at least think about our welfare as a society. We have to have kids who learn how to calm themselves down. And as a matter of fact, when we have children who are coming into care, the first thing we want to do before we do anything else is in every way possible get them calmed down. We want to get them as comfortable as possible as soon as possible. And that doesn't mean we start in teaching them the rules of our house. We start in with soothing. We start in with comforting rituals. In every way possible, we try to get that cortisol level down. We have to get kids who learn how to think about their feelings. We'll go more into this in a few minutes. But here's the problem. We've got kids who know how to think, and they know how to feel sometimes, but we sure can't get them to do both at the same time. If they're feeling, they're all the way into their feelings. We can talk about something, but they can't apply it once they start feeling, right? And so we need to be working on some of that. And I'll teach you some of the rudiments as time goes on. And in that pick of a book that I finally managed to get to press in 2007, of about 80 pages of in-home or casework ways we can teach kids some of these activities. I'm not trying to peddle the book, but on the other hand, I did write it for all of you. And, maybe you could borrow it from the library. Hope you don't sneak it through the Xerox machine, but that's kind of a futile hope. Anyway, and we also want them to learn to have empathy. That's one of the biggest problems that we have, isn't it, for some of the parents who are coming in as the bio parents to the children in child welfare. Do they have empathy for the kids? No, you're trying to teach them infant massage, and the birth mother turns and says, "How about me?" Or we have a visit with the birth mother, and she said, "I'd like to bring my boyfriend in here. He'll be parenting with me." So she brings him lunch because he's come over on break. The child starts to cry for French fries because that's in the lunch. And she says, "No, that's for him." And he eats them in front of the child. I mean, doesn't that make your blood run cold? And yet, can you put that in the court report for the judge? Well, you should, but sometimes we have people who don't know that maybe we should put that in, or this is rather chilling. We don't see any empathy on the part of the child. Or we get people who have learned that small, helpless children should be ridiculed or taunted or teased or sneered at, or worse, when nobody's looking, treated as a punching bag. So that we somehow have to turn it around so that people begin to internalize a sense of empathy. In other words, internalize is such a psychobabble term. But in other words, they have to be able to start feeling some empathy for themselves, which is where it starts, and then finding empathy for others. And what I say to kids is, well, when you get that feeling like you want to hurt somebody because they're small and helpless, or hurt the dog, or hurt your sister, somebody did that to you, and that idea will come into your head. So how did that feel for you when it happened to you? Well, not good. They're real great at identifying their feelings. It's, were you scared? Yes. Were you angry? Yes. Well, when you do that to other people, that's kind of like saying to those people they were right. That's what kids deserve. Do you want to be on that side, or do you want to be on the other side? On the other side. Yes, that's a good start, isn't it? But we really need to be working in a very mindful way on creating empathy so we don't come up with people who feel an impulse to hurt children and then follow up on that impulse. Okay. I want to talk just a few minutes about neglect also. And, I am not the brain expert or research expert that you've had here today. My piece of it is to talk in very practical terms. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the practicalities of neglect, because what my hope is that when you leave here, you're going to be able to look at neglect in a very different way in your court systems and begin to protect children more from neglect. When you have children who have been exposed to neglect, it influences connection and empathy, sharing the feelings of others and being able to tailor behaviors because of those feelings. When you have children and you have them in front of you in an early age, and you're naming feelings, and you're giving them this full access to your face, and you're expressing those feelings. They're the positive ones or the, oh, are you hungry? It's okay, I'm getting something, it's okay. Or, oh, did that scare you? Did the doggy scare you? It's okay. It's a nice doggy. Okay, do you want to pet the doggy? Ooh, okay, we can stand back and watch the doggy. What's the child learn? They learn to recognize their feelings, but then over time they learn to recognize the feelings in the other. And so what keeps them from doing mean things, yeah, you can put some consequences on the outside, but it's mostly they think, how would I feel, or I would feel a little bit of that if I did it to that person. So, if they slap somebody and they're 4 years old and you say, look, Jim has a little bit of plastic indentation here where you hit him with a toy hammer and then slapped him. That really hurts him. Do you hear him crying? Feels that feeling inside of him. He doesn't want to do it. If you have children who've had neglect in their life and no one's done that piece of work with them, I say to kids, how do you feel about that? Nothing. And they are troubled by it when they tell you that. Or, let me introduce you to a little guy, Justin. When he came to me at 6 years of age, and we'll talk about Justin throughout the day, and I'll show you a clip in a little while of him. If I would be Justin, and put on his hoodie. If I said, Justin, how do you feel when you hurt somebody? How about when you hurt your dad? Kind of good. Kind of good. I like doing it. I don't know why. I like doing it. And I know I get in trouble, so I try not to get into trouble. But I like doing it. Okay, so what do you know about Justin and his experience with neglect? Is that he doesn't know how to feel another person's feelings. He's just feeling like I've got to dominate people. And actually, he said that to me when he was 10 years old. I just want to dominate my dad for some reason. I don't know why. So, okay, let's go on. Thinking and feeling together. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, they can think without feeling or feel without thinking, but they tend to be poor at standing back, assessing the situation, and making a plan. And partly that's because the brain has learned this kind of sprint into activity for its own defense, right? But one of the things that we figure out when we are in a normal, safe, attached situation is something called reflective thought. And that's how you stand back and think about life. And Fonagy, who is a British researcher, and some folks in this country too, have looked to see what's one of the things that makes people heal up after they've had childhood adversity. And it's being able to have reflective thought. Because when you stand back and you think about things and make a plan, are you feeling it so acutely? No. And Cloytra is a researcher who has looked at women who have had all kinds of abuse throughout their life, kind of went through lots of different types of therapies and didn't particularly make any headway with it. And that's what she's taught them. In a very relationship-rich environment, how to stand back and make a plan. But here's the thing, then they role play it. Because you can make a plan, but when you actually try to do it, you have to get your motor impulses to follow along, and that's where they falter sometimes. So she actually does that kind of motor, that motor stuff where they have to get up and role play it and try it again. In other words, they have a chance to make a plan, practice a plan, and then it just comes naturally. You're probably all thinking of some of the work that Karen talked about yesterday. So that's a lot of what we do. We have kids practice that over and over again, how to make plans. How do you think that helps them later when they hit stressful things in life? It becomes their template. They also have problems with positive affects or feelings. There's a drift towards depression and hopelessness. In addition, it compromises the development of affective attunement, the ability to get in sync with other people. Kids tend to drift off, be more unreachable. Early neglect deprives children of the caregiver stretching of positive moods, which is a normal part of the optimal development of the right brain. So when we're coming to these kids later on, we know that their brain development has been altered such that all of the negative moods have too much track. In other words, they've laid down the wiring for all kinds of negative mood states. We were looking, a researcher, Pinus, was looking at some brain scans of kids. And he ran them up to some other folks and said, who do these brain scans look like? And all neglected kids. And the guy said, I've got some brain scans that look really similar. And they were the brain scans of women who had clinical rates of PMS that had offered themselves up to a university study for help. And so when we're, putting kids into homes, what we need to say is these kids are just kind of bad mood kids, and I'm not trying to say this against my own gender, but we've got these little PMS kids that we're placing, and it's not a happy thing. And if you're the caregiver and you're trying to repair and after, what happens when you're attaching to somebody and you're in a close relationship with somebody? Do you open up yourself to their moods? Yes. And if they're in a bad mood every day, how do you start to feel? You start to feel pretty bad after a while. And if I have people who have kind of a positive or above positive mood state, and often this is what we find adoptive parents start out like, foster parents start out like, they feel good about themselves as people, and they have a little extra to give, and they tend to have a vicious streak of optimism that runs right through them, little codependents who are like, come here to our system. We need you. But then we notice that their mood starts here. And then after we place 1, 2, 3 kids with them, there is a sharp downward trajectory, And then we're always trying to battle against hopelessness. And they're kind of holding back from some of the kids because they don't want to feel so bad. And so we have to very intentionally put in the kind of supports that Dr. Cross was just talking about with Mary Dozier's work, where you're fluffing people up all the time and you put that intentional support around them. You prepare them for shark music and you help them to have a sense of their true self, their true mission, and not to personalize that when the child is pushing them away, it's not them. That's the way the child's brain has been. And so I want to keep my interventions with this child 7-to-1 positive to negative interventions. I keep 7 pennies in one pocket. Usually I wear clothes with pockets. And then when I've spent 7 positives, then maybe I can do 1 negative. Or if I'm going to tell them that they need to redo something, then I really praise them. And we want to make all the positives this big pizzazz, hurrah. These kids' brains are wired so that they really head towards the vivid experience. And so what we want to be really vivid about are all the positives, because when it's novel, the brain pays attention to it. Oh, that's new. I should pay attention to it. This is really pretty interesting. But the stuff that's dull, our brain decides not to pay attention to. So I want to make pathology, misbehavior, pretty much dull as dirt. And then put all the pizzazz on all the positive things. I had a kid, and he used to have screaming tantrums for about 1.5 hours up to 2 hours a day, chased the kids at his family reunion with a shard of glass. And, so the adoption medical clinic said, Deborah, we'd like you to see this child. They always ask so nicely, do you think, and I had somebody that I needed the FASD clinic in town to see, and so I was real desperate. I said to them, I will see 3 kids over my waiting list if you will take this child within the next 48 hours. They said, done deal. But they actually sent the family in and said, this is 1. So, they're going to use their 3 well. Anyway, don't we all need favors, But that's how we get things done. Anyway, I saw this kid and we started to work with him just a little bit at a time. Can you calm down and beat the timer for 15 minutes, 10 minutes, calm down without throwing things. Wow, this time you calm down without throwing things. One time the mom called and she said, he's screaming, we're supposed to swim. And we thought of some strategies to calm him down. Like, if you can calm down, we're going to go swimming. Here's your suit. We're getting ready to go. You can do it all together. Now his brothers are all together. Now finally got himself calmed down. It only took about 20 minutes. And she came in and she said, then we all got in the car and went swimming. She said, what's significant about this is in my growing up family, you did something like that. They said, that's it, swimming's off. And they would have said to the brothers and sisters, because of you, we missed swimming. She said, but it's this whole thing. He calms down, we go swimming, and we go on with our day, and we have a great day. And then we say at the end of the day, and maybe next time you calm down even faster. We had a great day. Do you notice you're keeping all the emphasis on the positive? But we showed connection and support for this kid? You bet. Do you think he feels so ashamed and estranged and like a monster in his home? No. And that's what he said to me. He said, I feel kind of like a monster. And he kind of liked it because he felt like he needed those defenses. When you're really connected and you know who's got your back, do you need those kind of defenses? No. And that's one of the attributes of secure attachment. You don't feel like you're being set up. You feel like people have your back. You feel like if you mess up, people will feel bad with you. They'll help you see the lesson. You might have some accountability, but then they'll help you get back on track again. Okay, so in other words, what we're doing then with our kids is we're constantly trying to stretch new experiences so that they wire up in a really positive way. We have more positive moods for them. For many of our kids, they have real brittle mood states. They switch rapidly from mood to mood, which parents find really unsettling. For therapists, it's very difficult too because they say, well, she doesn't seem to care about such and such. Well, normally we want to keep kids in a mood long enough that you can figure out what's wrong and with some kind of a repair, right? These kids are crying and then laughing with a tear still on their face. It's not necessarily a good thing because then when they get later in life and they're supposed to get this wary feeling like the real shark music, like, no, that kid is looking at your kid sexually, they'll flip into dissociation or move out of the mood state through avoidance. And so then they don't get the lessons out of that would get them out of Dodge in a good state. So summarizing research findings, John Allen from the Menninger Clinic concludes, the more severe the psychological abuse, higher the rates of depression and suicidal behavior, the higher the number of types of maltreatment, psychological, sexual, physical abuse, neglect, the higher the likelihood of depression and suicidal behavior. And what do they do with some of those symptoms? It's what was said yesterday by Bruce Perry. They find some ways to anesthetize themselves instead of feeling some of those feelings. Then they're back into the system. The reason I'm mentioning this in the neglect slides, though, is because some of the work from the Oregon Social Learning Project looked at neglect over a period of time, and it is one of the predictors of multiple abuse. It's not just the kids get neglected, but this is the group that ends up by 6 and 7 years old is showing up with sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. That's part of the problem with neglect, is it opens, those are the environments in which these other abuses happens. And although psychological abuse was often confounded with other forms of maltreatment, it bore a stronger relation to depression and suicidal behavior than other childhood adversity. And that's something I also wanted to point out here. A lot of times we're looking at, the bad things that happened, but it's the psychological abuse that causes this sense of, I have no place in this world. There's nothing, I'm not worth really getting close to. I really just don't have anything about me that's appealing. And so when they come to attach, do they want to put those defenses down and open up oval body? Here I am. No. It's really hard when you believe it. As one woman said to me, she said, I've got scars from abuse, but I know that's wrong. And I can, I can defend against that. She said, but it's the things that were said to me that haunt me, that stay with me, that I have a hard time, I believe some of them today. As Alice Miller said, it's hard to defeat an enemy whose outposts are in the mind. And so when you're making court orders, watch for psychological abuse. When you're doing supervised visitation, for heaven's sakes, get someone in there who's actually taking notes or has an environment in which you can document whether psychological abuse is continuing or not. It's important. So after maltreatment, children have deficits in self-reflection and planning, basic to learning mistakes or walking around life's pitfalls. They use defenses rather than coping. They avoid, panic, dissociate, freeze, or go into fight. With a combination of trauma and neglect, we find deficits in executive functioning during to exposure from court. And I just have a little bit more of your vegetable slides here, and then we'll go into attachment. Sorry, I'm feeding you some of the vegetables first. But we'll get into something different. And these are what's called executive dysfunction. Forgetting or being preoccupied versus using working memory. They don't inhibit inappropriate behaviors instead of choosing appropriate ones. So what they end up doing is they move towards inappropriate behaviors without really thinking of the context. Instead of, wait, I need to inhibit, let me choose something more appropriate. Instead of using, they make impulsive choices instead of using logical reasoning. Think about it. If you were in a high-risk situation, what would work for you best? Quick reflex, if you were out on your own? Or picking out details, or sitting back and thinking through logic. Survival is better if you move rapidly and you make some choice. They make quick random responses to memories and events instead of organizing memories and events. That's what we find with our kids with executive dysfunction. I used to send kids for neuropsych starting in the 1980s. They come back and I keep on finding all this stuff with executive dysfunction. I thought, well, maybe the neuropsychologist I'm using is cracked. So I'll try using another neuropsych. Well, you want to make sure you don't have some bias going. She was well favored, but I tried some other neuropsychologists. Occasionally I get kids without executive dysfunction, but I kept on getting this over and over again. And so it wasn't until late 90s, early 2000 that we started to get the research stuff that came back in saying it's the exposure to cortisol that's causing this in kids. They're developing executive dysfunction, so we have to get them out of these highly stressful surroundings. And then also, once they enter homes, we have to make sure those homes are not as stressful as the homes they already left, right? One of the things that really helps kids to calm down as quickly as possible is movement into secure base relationships. So these kids can't organize or classify. So they might have normal cognitive ability, but when you ask them to remember things on memory tasks, they don't have a way to organize those memory tasks. It's kind of like having a wonderfully big closet in your home, if you have a normal IQ, But you don't have any coat hangers in there. You just throw everything in a jumble. So also, when we're trying to talk to these kids about their life's events and they can't organize meaningfully, how well do they do in some of our traditional therapies? In the casework tasks. Caseworkers come out, the kids are talking all over the place. So we have to organize these children also. How well do the parents do when they come in and we're trying to work with them? Many of the parents grew up with these same situations and they can't organize meaningfully. These kids scan surroundings instead of devoting attention to the task at hand. I had a brush with some really riveting people in the 80s who were involved with ritual satanic abuse. And I was treating a child, involved the police, and, they ended up rounding up somebody down in California as well as in the state of Washington, and it was going to court, so they thought to threaten me. And indeed, I felt the threat. And I, parked in front of the building and did all the things you would think you would want to do to keep yourself safe. But some man in the back of one of the conferences I was speaking at made a sudden, loud, impulsive noise. I about jumped through the roof. I never did really come back to my normal senses, and so I had a very difficult time devoting myself to the, what was at hand, but it was, some part of my brain was looking to keep safe. So one of the things that we can do for the kids is to be able to reassure them when they come into any of our surroundings that we will keep them safe. And just as basic things as saying, we will make sure, I will guarantee you will be safe here from the beginning to the end of the visit. I will personally keep you safe. And by the way, I have a special certificate that shows that I am a certified safe individual. And I show them one of my certificates. I have a picture on the wall, but I bring out diplomas, licenses, and prove this to them. And I let them know that their parents have the same thing. They're really impressed by that. And, I draw pictures of you judges. And I say, the judges are working very hard to keep you safe. Let's think of 3 things that you might want to ask the judge when this thing goes to court. I actually have a little boy, same one, Justin, and he's written a thank you note to the judge. It says, "Dear Judge, thank you for me. Thank you for putting me in a safe family, one that doesn't abuse me, doesn't hurt me. Love, Justin." Very sweet, isn't it? But we have to be able to guarantee that for kids and then stand behind that guarantee. The visitations have to be safe. Watch out who's brought into the visitation. If I talk in terms of my little guy, Justin, you know who was brought into one of his supervised visitations? His grandfather. Now, doesn't that sound like kind of a nice thing, bring Grandpa in? Yeah, only Grandpa was his abuser. And Grandpa brought his knife and showed it to him in the visitation, okay? Later, Grandpa made a visit to the home and showed the same knife to his brother. How do you think Justin felt? Safe in those visitations? He was terrified. So we really have to keep these visitations very carefully controlled. And watch out that our own prejudices about safety are not ones that we impose on other children. Anyway, as long as stress is high, there's continuing damage from stress on regulation as well as on executive dysfunction. So get kids out of highly stressful settings for their brain's sake, and don't place children in such homes or care settings. So the kids that we're working with tend not to generalize. That's part of executive dysfunction. They don't see overarching themes. They see tree, tree, tree. They don't get the big picture. So we have to go back and explain to them what the big picture is. The main reason I'm out here to visit with you today is such and such. The big point I want you to get is such and such. So let's draw that for you. Okay. Because what we've also found is that many of them have auditory memory chalkboards that are very, very small because the brain has compromised the future to pay for the present. To be so alert to your surroundings means that you really diminish what you put into the long term. You know, many of us deal with limited real estate. You know, I knew I was going to be talking today, and because I wanted to have enough brain power to last for the afternoon, moving around to look a little bit lively up here, I slipped in a little bit today. Well, that's because I want my brain to be, you know, kind of fresh for you all. Well, for many of these kids, they're using a lot of their brain power just to know who's in the room, to watch the doors, and does that guy look like that guy with that beard, okay? And so what we have to do is really help them focus on something and then supplement their systems there. They also have trouble accessing memory systems, especially auditory. So we use cues like role play. We use lots of visual with those kids. Also with FASD, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or some of you have kids who are coming up with findings of static encephalopathy, which means the brain of FAS without the diagnosis. What we're finding for many of those kids is that auditory just disappears in a blink. But role play will stay with them, and so will visual stuff. So we need to be drawing and need to be role playing what we want these kids to remember. I'm going to do a few more slides on unresolved childhood trauma to our kids, because we'll have some of that towards the end of the day here. And I know I'm going fast, but you know, I'm just kind of pulling in some of the threads. When we have kids who haven't had proper trauma treatment, it diminishes their ability to attach for a number of reasons. But one is shame's integrated into their identities. Do you want to open up to people when you have shame integrated in your identity? I'm the kind of person these things happen to, is what they feel. They have diminished meaningful relationships just because after trauma, the posture of trauma is like this. The posture of loss is like this. You know, so it's really hard to have a meaningful relationship. The posture for a meaningful relationship is this. You know, how many traumatized people are walking around looking like this unless they have extreme dissociation or, you know, maybe dissociative identity disorder? And that is its own can of worms. They can feel alarming body symptoms. They have mood problems, you know. And let me go back here for a minute. If we look at mood problems, that includes aggression. If we have kids who are placed into homes after trauma, and they're 4 and under, we find that over 90% of those kids are going to have mood problems and aggression. Are we telling this to our foster parents? Well, we should be. And that way we can get them ready. This is normal. Let's get your bag of tricks so that it doesn't just have the normal tools that you're used to handling. Let's get you a heavy-duty toolbox here, because you'll need to be using specialized parenting for these kids. And you'll need a lot of respite for your own brain processes to recover. The body symptoms, again, over 90%. If they're traumatized under the age of, or 4 and under, they show a bias towards using dissociation or conservation withdrawal rather than coping. They don't go get a parent to watch their back. They're parallel tracks, you know. I don't have to integrate what's happening to me or just shut down. Way of thinking about that is like when I was a growing up kid, my parents had a number of children, and then they did some fostering. So there were quite a few of us. And my dad noticed that my mom had ADD and seemed to lose track of us. She's a sweet woman, but she's had lifelong ADD. And so after a few perilous incidents, we were moved out to an acreage. And we had border collies. And we kids thought that they were pets. It turned out that they were just, now I realize, part of the general process to get us all clumped together and, you know, to survive our childhoods. Anyway, but our border collies found a bunny one time. And my sister and I, we were looking at this bunny, and it was like this. and we got it away from the dog and kept the dog away. But, the money didn't kind of come too. And what saved it in the first place, that frees up, it didn't save it in the long run. Because my sister and I have different memories about it. She said the money got away. I'm really not too sure. I think we got bored and left it there. And, maybe the dogs did get it. I don't know. I run hot and cold. But that's the thing, is when kids have these states, these emotional states, and they're dissociative, and they use an earlier form of that, of conservation withdrawal, what ends up is they get stuck in those states and they spend long periods of time in that, and they're not available for attachment. They're not available for learning. And so we just end up with some real dead time. They lose a simple belief in a loving God. I was talking to a boy one time, and this girl had invited him to some religious practices at her church. And I said, "What do you think you'll go?" He was 16 or 17 at the time. And he said, "I thought about it. She's a cute girl." And I said, "Well, what do you think?" And he said, "I decided not to go." I said, "Well, is that because it's a Christian practice and your family's Jewish?" And he said, No, that didn't have anything to do with it. I still would have gone for that. She's a cute girl." I said, "What was it then?" He said, "I just don't think that God's for people like me. People with such an unlucky life. But they see themselves as outside of the purview of God's care." Because here's the thing, all of us who work in the area of attachment can't help but think that attachment is the type or the way we come to learn about a loving God. And that pretty much all of us have problems with attachment with a loving God. I'm not here to proselytize yourself, but it's certainly an interesting concept for those of us who work in the attachment field. And when you learn that attachments are unsafe and you're outside of a protection of care, what do you think about God? You're somehow outside of that special group. They also have difficulty finding their places in the world. They uncouple the mind-body connection, learn to use a parallel way of processing incoming information. They dissociate from highly charged information, attending instead to everyday matters. Okay, so this is a lot of how their kids go on to get influenced by abuse later. Another person would, my sister had this guy with domestic violence over in her house, and now she's asking to come stay with me. I've got small kids. Maybe I should say, "No, you need to find somebody else." "Oh, no, come on. You can come to my house. It'll be okay," even though this guy's knows exactly where she's going. They don't integrate all that together. One of the reasons I'm bringing this up is it's through an attachment relationship we can calm kids down, and they can start to use real coping, real human relationships, and go to care instead of using this highly dissociative way of working through. If you want to figure out which kids recover from trauma, it's those kids who ended up with an attached relationship, especially a secure base attachment relationship earlier on. Those are the kids who are insulated. And those kids are the same kids who can use reflective thought, who can think and feel together, and take advantage from all these therapies. For most of our kids who, we're all talking about the same group that this slide set is talking about, right? We're going to have to build in a secure base attachment for them to give them enough resilience that then they can go on and heal up from life's tragic events so that they can get optimal brain development later on. So that's where the abuse and neglect and the attachment literature move through. And in that largish book I mentioned earlier, I've got a whole protocol for how you use all these great cognitive behavioral therapies. But first, you build some resource in. First, you put in some attachment relationship and you keep people in. And these are just more of these statistics. These were from the field trials from Bessel van der Kolk, who is with the Harvard Trauma Center, and they were for the DSM-IV diagnostic manual. So If the kids were traumatized by abuse under the age of 14, these are their rates of difficulty: 77% affective dysregulation or anger problems, 80% were dissociative, 54% chronic pain, 66% suicidal, 75% had hopelessness. The earlier ones under the age of 5, 4 and under, they're all above the 90th percentile. So what's the take-home message? We're going to work on basics that increase their connections, decrease stress, but we're creating resilience in our kids. We're not assuming that they have it. When you look at the resilient kids, they're not these kids. You know, everybody wants to say, well, children are so resilient. Well, the statistics don't show that these kids are resilient. The kids who are resilient are the kids who have had somebody pouring in early on. Now, these kids can become resilient, but we have to be mindful and put some resilience capacities in. It doesn't just happen automatically. You know, there's not a fairy wand there on adoption day. You know, we really have to think, how are we going to create attachment? How are we going to create these other capacities? So we have to identify and nurture resilience skills in our family. One of the resilience capacities in children, secure base attachment. So these connections to other people are essential to our happiness. They also reduce our worries, that we're not on our own. Who are the worried people? Not these rugged, self-sufficient people. Those are people who feel like they've got to make it on their own, which is not a good thing. The really secure people know who they can call in a moment's emergency. Now, they have lots of areas of mastery. That's the horse of a different color here. Areas of mastery are different. If we have an area of mastery, that's another area of resilience, and we want to identify those areas. But, you know, it's when we've got somebody who can really help us out, teach us something, we don't feel like we have to have all the answers. Attachment is the vehicle also through which we achieve physiological emotional regulation, which you've heard now a lot of with Bruce Perry, Karen, David Cross, you know, these experts coming in. It's through these intimate connections that we learn patterns of emotional regulation. Children's brains wire in synchronicity with the neural firing patterns of their attachment figures. So when we're working in a positive, secure way with our kids, we've got an old pattern that they've learned, but then we're developing a new pattern. And these patterns have to happen real time. I'm sorry, but if you're going to work with kids and you go and show them sandbox, you've got the little figures moving around, does that help them connect to somebody's brain in a new and dynamic way? No, it doesn't. They might be able to express something, but you want to have attachment happening real time with the people who are the child's caregivers. Whether that's later when they get into a group situation, you know, with some kind of a children's home, or whether that's a short-term foster parent, or whether that's the long-term foster adoptive parent, it's going to be real time. Or it could be the biologic parent that you're teaching for the first time these patterns for secure base. So these attachments are exclusive, intimate, emotional, physiological relationships between people. And attachments are always between two people because they're relationships. You can't guess what kind of an attachment a child's going to have unless you have a person there to whom that child can actually attach. And what are we telling lots of our foster parents when they've had 13, 14, 15, 16 kids? Don't attach. You'll just hurt. And Mary Dozier's work has shown us that if we have some of these long-term foster parents who've been so hurt that they don't want to attach anymore, do you know what they do? They start pushing children away. They no longer try that real time, get close to me. And so we have to, with our long-term foster parents, keep teaching them how to attach. Attachment styles are equally strong, whether they're secure or insecure attachments. And they're formed by the 7th month of life if there's an available parenting figure. I was wondering and they're built over time. It's going to take some time to attach. Attachment, usually we can see the style of attachment by 7 months of age. But when kids come into homes, it's going to take them a little while. They can also have different attachment styles with different parents. Through our attachments, we learn attunement, and we learn to predict the heart and mind of another person. So we develop this theory of mind. What motivates them? How do they feel? How do they think? This is really fundamental so that then we can coordinate with other people later in life, which is back to what Karen's doing, learning that children will cooperate with her or form a compromise or respect her. There's a theory of mind. I can feel my feelings. At the same time, I can begin to know and respect another person. Okay, so I want to talk about a little bit of the altering of the dance and styles of attachment. So let's talk a little bit about attachment, what the lessons for secure attachment are. Okay. So, Casey, why don't you come on over here? Okay. And Casey has a couple children. Do you feel like you're forming secure base attachments with your children? Okay. So if you're a mom and I'm a child, when I look at you, what do I see in your eyes? Like, notice how her smiling, sparkling eyes, open body posture, kind of a welcome, right? Okay, and if you notice our eyes, is we're attaching to children, we actually open them up just a little bit wider. And that's one of those things that we cue with. If Casey's a mom and she asks me for a hug, ask me for a hug, Casey, and I'm a child.
Can I please have a hug?
Yeah, notice she wiggles a little bit, she comes down a little bit. There's this sense of, this is going to be fun. Okay, so go ahead and ask me for a hug.
Can I please have a hug?
And then what happens is I get a little bit excited, and then when I see her, I downregulate, bring down pulse, respiration, unless we're going to go out and play a little bit. Do you notice any real high cortisol level? No. Now, in secure base attachment, that's what most of us think about when we're thinking about attachment. But there are other styles of attachment, so let's talk a little bit about this. So, Casey, okay, say you're mom, and I'm a child who's just coming into your care, all right? But I have not had a secure base attachment. As a matter of fact, I've had some avoidant attachment, or I've been anxiously attached, and we'll show those styles in a minute, or I've been disorganized, okay? And sometimes you've gotten really angry with me and you've slapped me. And you've slept in, and when I try to get you out of bed, you cuss me. And you invite unsafe people into the house, and then you kind of laugh when I come up and cry and call me crybaby, okay? And now you would like, I'm thinking of all of this because I don't know the difference between you as the new foster mom and other mother figures I've had. And so my experience has been that you've done these awful things to me. So in my heart and mind, what I'm thinking of is I might get hit and I might get hurt. And she might just push me away. So I want you all to offer me some suggestions here as to what to do, because she's going to ask me for a hug for a minute. And I would like the people in these 3 tables here on the end, all of you, when I give a signal, I want you to call out to me, she's safe. And then I want these next 3 rows of tables here and on back, I want you to call out to me, watch out. And then I want you folks here at the end, when I give you the signal, and the signal will be like this for the whole crowd. We'll have quite the cacophony here. I would like you all to shout out to me, do it now. So, Casey, ask me for a hug.
Can I please have a hug?
Give me. your breath stinks. And of course her breath is just fine. But what I'm doing is trying to get some space and distance, and here's the pitiful thing is deep in my heart. This is what I want more than anything in the world. It's just I can't believe that I'm going to be able to get in through that door that looks to be so open and out again without getting my tail singed. So there are alarms all over the place. Okay. Now, Casey, how's that make you feel when I'm looking at you like this?
Terrible.
Yeah, she feels terrible, afraid. And what happens is that we've got these parents who are parenting traumatized children. The form of attachment this is the one that about 83% of kids in the child welfare system come into homes as having a disorganized style with trauma lacing through it. So do you feel like I like you?
No.
After a while, do you get kind of tired of being treated like an abuseful, neglectful parent? And, if you're a married person and your husband comes home, what do you feel like saying about your day? Okay, I'll say this. And did you have a good time? Kind of here at home, taking off work with the baby or the child while I worked? What's for dinner?
Yeah.
It doesn't fly. It doesn't fly. And these are the parents that keep trying, but they keep hitting the wall. And, if I say to you, we're going to have a hot breakfast this morning. I was thinking of a line I heard from another presenter. The wife said, if you want a hot breakfast, try lighting your cornflakes on fire. But if you know that this is what's normal, then what you can say something to me is, come on in close. You can say, we're going to practice this a little bit at a time. And Casey, I know you're not used to getting close to a mom and being safe. But why don't we just practice rocking and cuddling? How many minutes do you want to have? Do you want 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes? How much time do you want? Or you can use amounts. How much time do you think you'd like? And this time you'll be the child. I'll be the mom. How much time? Move my hands and show me.
5 minutes.
Very, very strong of you. Way to go, Casey. Okay. So what kind of touch do you like? When I hug you, do you like this kind of soft touch? Do you like a little firmer touch?
Soft.
Soft touch. Like that. Oh, do you know what kind of touch I like? Same thing. And this is for the child who may had devolved hugging into the barracuda death grip, they're holding on to, because some of the kids, they'll just grab and hold and kind of hang on you. And what kind of stroking do you like on your back? Because you remember, don't you, that I never touch kids' privates or anything like that. I'd never embarrass you in that way. Do you like this kind of touch on your back? Or do you like a little scratch on your head? Or do you like this, like that? Which kinds do you like? Let's do them again. And you put up one finger with what you like. Okay, so how about like that? Do you like that? Yeah, not that great though. How about like this? Good. Which is a regulation device that I learned from the OTs. How about this? Yeah. Well, I'll be sure to include those things, okay? So let me give you a little hug. Are you ready for it now? Mm-hmm. You let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Ready. Oh, I love your voice. So come on, let's have a hug. Nice. And if it would give you a little more control, we could do 1, 2, 3 hugs. Would you like to learn about 1, 2, 3 hugs? 1, we look at each other. 2, we get the hug. 3, let go. Nice. Well done, Casey. That just filled up my love tank. So how many hugs do you think kids get every day? Any guesses?
20.
20? It's a good guess. A lot of kids do. My kids will often come up with 1 or 2 a week. They're not going to risk this too much. And so we set a number for them. We'll say even adults need 7. But most kids who have been with their moms, and their moms, have been parenting them for a while, they get like 10 a day. How many do you get? Just guess. Like, I don't think you get more than 2 or 3. So why don't we start you out with 12? Because I think you've missed out on a lot, okay? So we'll keep track of it on the refrigerator, how many hugs you get every day, okay? And when I'm talking to her, I might stroke her palm, because what this means is wake up, eat, and it's one of those cures for attachment. Or I might reach out and, if she's not defensive to her face, some of the pride training doesn't let you do this. So if you're, don't do this if you're involved with the pride program. But if you've adopted, just pay no attention to it. And it's just like that. And this might be too much for certain kids, but you can use kind of a little puppet or something and go like this. And kids, this is a very tender touch. How many people can touch you on your face in this tender way? Not very many. For me, it's, my mother. I'm blessed. My parents are still living. My mother, my brother, my father, just very few people. My husband, definitely. But, it's just very, very tender. Actually, all speakers run the grave risk of talking about their dogs or their children. And I'll try to limit it. But fortunately, I've chosen one of my children. But at one point, one of my kids learned these lessons a little too well. I said, listen up, Joe. That's my husband. I said, our daughter doesn't do a thing we say. And she was about 3 years of age. He said, what do you mean? She was just very agreeable. I said, well, and I was using the royal we as not to embarrass him. But I said, you just asked her to please go upstairs and get ready for bed. I said, this is what she said to you. She came up and she said, I'd love you to, Daddy, and when I get some time, I will do that. On the other hand, she is the most agreeable person. But it's just a way of saying, eat, because the world over, this is an attachment cue. Eat, So we're using these things that are hardwired into us because it's a language that the body remembers. We're really working at a very basic level here. Do you remember how yesterday Bruce Perry had all those diagrams and they always started low, mid-brain, or the low with the brain stem, and then he's got the limbic system and so forth. And you saw some of those diagrams with Karen and Dr. Cross. And we're working, attachment is in the limbic system. It's a very early system, and it's a whole lot about let's eat. Let's get close. Let's pig-pow together and feel great comfort from our warm bodies all together. And there's lots of skin to skin with it. So would you mind staying close by so that we can do some more role play? Actually, let's go on and just do these in a clump, and we'll catch up with death by PowerPoint slides later. Okay. So let's do some of the other ones. Now let's talk a little bit of what the secure attachment gives us. Our secure attachment gives us a sense that we're worth loving, that intimacy is enjoyable, that when you connect with somebody, when you see them, you downregulate. That is, this is my safe person. Also, who do you grieve with? Do you grieve with somebody you never met before? You will only grieve with known caregivers who have the ability to stay there for the whole grief period and can help get you out of a grief state again if you're a child. because kids won't risk it enough to grieve with people they don't know. You know, if something happened to my husband, I would be in a sorry way, that's for sure. But if I did not have access to help, because I'm an adult and I have an adult personality, I would still have within me the stamina to then go through the grief process. Okay? Kids don't have those emotional reserves. And so they're not going to grieve unless they really know someone and they start having a beachhead of attachment with them, and then they know that that person's going to stay with them. Or if they've had the problem of starting in with such a person who then leaves, do you think they're going to start in again? No, not until they know that person's really going to stay there. So we have a lot of kids stuck in pathologic grief, because they've never grieved. So let's do a little bit more. And so when you're with me and we're doing this secure attachment work, are you liking yourself? Yes. And so you start to develop this kind of openness to the world. I like myself, and so when I go to school later on, maybe I'm going to like the teacher. And maybe that teacher will give me sunny smiles and have correct approaches, and then later I'm going to remember who I am, and I'll be in school activities, and I'll be able to cooperate in groups, and I'm going to learn a whole lot about back and forth reciprocity and attunement from you. Then I'll carry those lessons out in life. Okay, let's do a couple other styles of attachment. So say you're mom and I'm a child. No, we'll do it the opposite way. I'm mom and you're the child. Okay, and you wet your pants today at school. And you're 6 years of age, all right? You're in kindergarten, and so you've come home and you've told me that you wet your pants. So come on over and tell me you wet your pants in school.
Mommy, I wet my pants today in school.
You sure did. Big girl like you. Did anybody see? Oh. Well, go downstairs and put your clothes in the laundry room. Don't put your laundry in with the rest of the family. Put it in a bucket. Okay, go. And you'll wonder why other kids don't like you. Now, how do you feel about me as an audience? Like, what a terrible, yes, okay. The villain, right. Now, this isn't even, this wouldn't even meet psychological abuse, would it? But this is what avoidant kids have, insensitive parenting. Now, if I'm feeling, now we're going to switch roles. Okay, pretend I was the child who had to go down to the basement with her wet clothes, and you were the parent who, made those off-the-wall comments. And maybe you called your sister and she said, well, you wet your pants till you were 10 years old. You should have been nicer to her, which may have informed some of your reaction, to this child's needs. And you're feeling kind of you're feeling kind of guilty about what you did. Now ask me for a hug.
Come here and give me a hug.
All right. Okay, and that's a more avoidant attachment, and parents tend to be very dismissive of the child's tender needs. And what we find is that if we place children into homes with dismissive parents, that these children really don't move into secure attachment, styles of attachment. How could they? And really, they really stay very, very defended, okay? And then let's have a kid maybe who's been traded between caregivers over and over again, okay? And so you keep being sent to kin, and then you finally come to me. Actually, I'll be the one who's been traded around, and I finally come to you, and you're the mom, and I just think that you are the best thing since sliced bread. All right? Now, and I'm pretty anxious because I already think I'm going to be left again. And I'm trying to move into your pattern of behavior, which is a secure-based pattern of behavior, but I'm afraid I'm going to be moved. Okay. So when you want to attach to me and you ask me for a hug, go ahead, ask me for a hug.
Will you come over here and give me a hug, please?
Okay, now tell me it's time for bed.
It's time to go to bed now.
Don't leave me, Mom. Please don't leave me, Mom. Please don't leave me, Mom. Please don't. Please don't. Now, you read me 5 stories. You sing a few songs. You pray. God, let me get out of here sometime tonight. I'm a single parent and I've got 3 hours of telecommuting. Okay. But finally you make a break for it. Go ahead, make a break for it.
Good night.
You left me just like my birth mother left me. And I didn't even like your stories anyway. Use a good reading voice like my kindergarten teacher. Okay, how do you feel about yourself? Come over to my, we've got to be in the eye, Okay, so how do you feel?
Guilty for leaving you.
Yeah. And yet, how do you feel when I'm like this? Don't leave. Desperate, right? And so some of the children's desperation influences how their parents are. And so one of the most basic things we have to do is keep the caregiver, so the poor caregiver, male, female, stays regulated in themselves so that they've got some respite, so that they can get some time just to count their beans before they completely lose all their marbles, and are just desperate because the child is reading the child's state of mind or the parent's state of mind. Now you be the anxious child, and instead of me being anxious, I'll be more resolved, okay? Say you've been in my home for 3 months. And no, let's make it longer, 6 months. And I no longer lie down next to you or help you in that way. Okay, it's time to separate. So we're going to do a 1, 2, 3 hug. And we're going to practice just before dinner here about how we're going to do evening. Okay, and we're going to practice it 3 times so you've got it down. And then when it is evening, I'm going to have a picture of us. We're going to put it by the bedstand, and then you are going to go to sleep there with the picture. Or I'll take my shirt that smells like me, and you can wear it. Or I'll take my pillow that smells like me, and you can sleep on it. Okay? And then I'm going to be in the hall working on my computer, but you'll stay in your room. And we say, Mom, are you still there? You know what I'm going to say? I'm here, honey. I'm here. Okay? Do you notice how we're working it into it a step at a time, a step at a time? But these are patterns of attachment, patterns of behavior, emotion. They're going to take us time. But we've also got to keep the parent who keeps cueing, responding in an appropriate way for this kid who over-cues us or under-cues us or negatively cues us. That way our response patterns don't start responding in the other way. Now, I was going to say one more thing, but you know what? It is our break time. And I think we'll just take our break on time, and I'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Casey. All right, folks, let's get started again. We're looking at some information that's really critical, like what's your attitude towards attachment? Have you had situations in your life where you were frightened by your caregivers? Or where you found that they were frightened? And if so, how did that affect you? How did you make sense of that later on in life? Because what we found is that if you've got caregivers who are chronically frightened or chronically frightening, children find those mood states to be very disconcerting. They form disorganized attachment styles with that. Or if you have caregivers who are so harsh that the kids are afraid of those caregivers, the kids will withdraw from those caregivers. But the piece that we have not been understanding as a group is that if we have caregivers who have traumatic stress themselves, or we have caregivers who are in grief states, the kids find those states so difficult that they will withdraw from them. They're disconcerting because the thing about attachment is it's a limbic to limbic system connection. And so we get in touch with the heart and mind of another person. And if that person's mind frightens us, we don't want to get close to that person. Casey, I wonder if you'll come up and we'll do a little bit more role play together. Why don't you stand right here? Okay, now Casey, if you're a child and you want to get close to me, and I have post-traumatic stress disorder, I do not have a mild case of traumatic stress disorder. Maybe I was in a bad car accident, but other than that, my life has been relatively normal. But I've had a series of hits. And maybe this is my third trauma. And you want to come up and get a hug from me, but Mommy, unfortunately, is thinking about the trauma in her mind, whatever that trauma is. And it doesn't matter whether I'm a biologic parent, foster parent, adoptive parent. So come up for a hug. Do you feel comfortable? No. No, you're starting to feel, no, my mother is nuts, okay? And so that's, when you're asking kids to attach to caregivers who are themselves very frightened, and they've been involved with domestic violence, or they have traumatic stress, or they have unresolved mental illness, well, kiss that goodbye. And what happens instead is that it's kind of like this. You're the child and I'm Mommy, right? You come for a hug, and I'm like, you're all I've got. You're all I've got. And I start doing a classic role reversal, and you're the reason that I'm living. And you start feeling responsible for my well-being. That's way too much weight for small shoulders, isn't it? Do you feel respect and safety from me? No. Yeah, you feel like you're going to take care of me. And this is one reason why our kids don't grieve particularly well. Well, I share that my parents are still alive, and I've been fortunate enough that things that we had not resolved, we've had many years to resolve, and I've been resolved for quite a few years now. My father's going to be 90 this year, and if he passes on, I will be sad. But do you think I'm going to have a hard time grieving him? No, because my mind will know what I lost. And I will miss him terribly, but I will enjoy reminiscing. I will enjoy thinking about the gifts that he gave me. Believe I'll see him in the hereafter, okay? So, on the other hand, if my dad had beaten me, sexually abused me, or psychologically abused me, or told me I'd be a terrible mother someday, or said I was good for nothing, do you think I would grieve my father easily? No. If I felt like I was responsible for my dad's welfare and he didn't do so well some days, do you think I would grieve him well? No, because who do we have a hard time grieving? Those people who are so difficult for us to understand, where we've got some kind of indeterminate role. And as adults, we have a hard time with that. You can imagine without abstractability how much trouble young kids have or teens have with some of this. It's way too much for them. So if you were a teenager, and if I were your adoptive mother, and you came to me and you wanted to be close to me, what might you want to do? And you might want to hold hands. But if you came from a disorganized past, and maybe you were in a role reversal with your mom, what would you maybe want to help me do? Take care of the kids? You're going to be the boss? Tell them to all shut up and line up? If you don't have very much good in your life, and then you're trying to parent kids out of an empty heart, how well does that go? You might want to tell me to sit down and watch television. You might want to take over the house. You might want to boss Dad around. Or you might go the other way. You're going to befriend Dad and you're going to tell me how to parent well. How well does that go over in homes? No, the parents are like, come notice I have all the wisdom of these years, but many of the kids are coming in and they do have classic role reversals. What's the job of any child of an alcoholic or addicted parent? What's the job? Take care of the parent, because if you take care of the parent, then maybe something will be left over for you. Maybe that's how you're going to get just a little bit of connection or a little bit of love for you. And then kids get really good at mastering that. I was working with a little girl, and when she was moved very abruptly through a court order back to her birth mother. And so she had come into care with her brother when she was 4, he was 3. They stayed in the foster adopt family for a year, and then she moved back, and the birth mother wasn't ready, and she wasn't able to succeed. Anyway, I came on the scene when the child was about 8 years old, and you know who she was worried for? Her birth mother. How's she going to function without me? What's going to become of her? I just didn't do a good enough job. That's why this happened. If I hadn't told about what I told about at school, then they wouldn't have picked me up. And she treated her foster mother, who's then her adoptive mother, with such contempt. One time we were just going through some pictures, helping her organize her memory and her traumas and her attachment. And I said, so why do you think you were moved by the judge when you were? She said, well, because it was just too much work for my mother. She said, that's why I don't trust her now. She was always complaining about how much work we are, and she's probably going to get rid of us again. See how this functions to cause some insecurity. And so we have to tell over and over again, whose jobs, what, but also solace these kids. One of the things I said to that girl is, I think you did an excellent job in taking care of your mother. Just an excellent job. You did the best job just about anybody could do. But, even adults don't succeed with this. It was a partially open adoption. I said, even your grandma couldn't succeed at this. And she tried very, very, very hard, But we've had to put it into a context that she could begin to understand. And her mother started to cry in the session she was there. She said, the day you were moved was the worst day of my life. The work I did for you and your brother was the happiest work I ever did in my life. Do you think I really liked accounts receivable? She kind of blurted it out. But, it gives us a chance to really get some reality perception. What do you think would have been different if the judge had court-ordered a 2-week transition for that little girl? She might have been able to process some of the reality about the loss, right? And it's not that maybe the judge didn't want to make that choice to give the birth mother a chance to try to parent, but just the transition would have been very helpful in that particular case. Let's do one other type of, it's not really an attachment, it's a permutation that we see sometimes that kids act out in the home. So Casey, okay, so you're the child and I'm the parent. I'll show you what a trauma bond looks like. This really isn't a style of attachment, but we see this sometimes in kids. It's a way to fuse kids together. So you come up to me, okay, and you need some care, only I don't respond the first time. So start bugging me. Mom. Stop, they're just getting to the good part. The ex-murderer is almost ready to open up the door. Mom. What? Nothing. Okay, now let me alone, will you? Mom. Now cry. Oh, I'm so sorry. What's this kid learn? to get love, you first get a little bit of pain. So what do they try in their homes all the time? First we go up so we can come down again. So this child comes into the home and she's always looking to agitate for a fight. Say you're 13, 14 years old. Is this a difficult adolescence? A little bit more than that, honey. And what we're all hoping is that we can teach this teen how to have a relationship without this, so that then that is a person who doesn't move into a domestic violence situation, because that sure is one way to get close after, because with a high excitement, they fuse into that. So we need to talk to these teens about what are the patterns of attachment. And maybe with teens, we are too gingerly. We say, well, gee, you're really going to touch them like this? You're really going to hug them so much? Well, how much touch do teens really need? Well, you've ever seen them overlapping on the school grounds? Apparently quite a bit. But perhaps we could give them the right type of touch this time, okay? So, they need just as much as other people. Now, you certainly can be gingerly about where don't they want touched, but they need a lot of hug. And maybe you're going to have to be more sensitive about their sexual development needs. But you can define that. I was working with a girl who'd been sexually abused at a young age. She has a series of scars from about 3 different abuse situations. One very bad, she wasn't treated medically. One was from that. Anyway, when she came in to see me, one of the first things that she did was show how much she was craving to be touched, and her dad would just sit like this, and she'd nestle into him, and she looked much younger. Was she much younger? Yes. Now, there are some ways that they could make sure that she didn't get confused about sexuality, because certain people do get confused about sexuality and closeness. One way was to do any kind of cuddling in the living room while mom or somebody else was home, right? But at one point I was talking to her. She was trying to talk to her mother about how many lies she told, because she wanted to open up authentically to her mother. And that is one of the attributes of attachment. You can open up authentically to another person. And so we decided that she would talk to her mother about this. Casey, you've got the cutest shoes on in the whole world, but can you take your shoe off for a second? This guarantees nobody will be shaking hands with me later in the day. Just give me one foot. But one of the things that she had me do is just rub the instep of her foot with her feet in my lap while she looked at her mother. And she said, Mom, when I came to you, I was a teenager, and I said I trusted you, and I wanted to be adopted. She said, but I lied. All I wanted is out of where I was. And I didn't trust you at all. And I've been lying to you a lot. Okay? Now I'll put you down, but notice how I'm rubbing the whole time. How's that starting to feel? Except that you're on the stage one-legged. But does that feel good?
Relaxing.
It's very relaxing. Now, are you going to end up with some kid who accuses somebody of abuse from foot rubbing? No, you're just good to go on that, okay? But, it kept her regulated. It kept her connected. It kept her from leaving her body. Finally, she said, Mom, I only trust you about 10%. Her mom's an accountant, and she looked at her and she said, well, when you came, it was 0%. Now it's 10. Maybe next year it'll be 20. Could be 30. We're getting there. Now, isn't this affirming? Yeah, but with these kids, a lot, they need to be touched because this helps them regulate. And they've been through so much. So find out what kind of touch they want, what kind of regulation they want. And there are other things we can do for teens, too. We got some questions over the break. You can tell I hold hands with kids a lot. I had one kid who came in to see me. She was living out of home, actually, because she was so rough with her twin that she had done something that was close to lethal. Anyway, so she was living with an aunt while, they looked me up, and we were trying to see whether she could go back to live at home safely and the processes for that. So I went to touch her hand, hold her hand, and she put her hand down. This is a kid who was making no progress with IEP. And she says, I'm tactily defensive. She's tactily defensive, don't touch my hand. But she hadn't been touched at all. I said, well, that's funny that you say that, because I hear that you touch the privates of the little boy on the small bus you see in the wheelchair, but, so apparently comes and goes. So maybe we should teach you some positive touch here, instead of the gotcha touch. And, she'd take her baby dolls, go, ha, 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 and bang their heads. And, she'd been through some rough treatment. Anyway, we eventually did some trauma work with her so she could have some empathy for herself, and she got safe. But it was not 7 sessions before she came in, and she looked at me in this coy look and just put out her hand and went like that, But many of the kids are just starved for touch, starved for love. And you can use this type of touch just for all kinds of people. And you can tell it just comes naturally to me. Now, is this a little immature? For some of the kids, yes. But if you'll find this in close relationships. And our society's so uptight. And we veer to the level of control instead of attachment that we're scared of holding hands. You go into other countries and they're holding hands walking up the street. And I'm thinking, how did we lose that, What were we preoccupied doing? Okay, thanks, Casey, for role-playing with me. So, when we're... She did look good, didn't she? Okay. So when we're working with caregivers, the rule that we've got is nurture your caregivers. And so when we're doing home studies with them or parent support, we're figuring how can we keep them sensitive? Because if you want people with secure attachments, you get people who start in with pretty much of a secure state of mind towards attachment, or they're at least willing to work towards that. And sensitivity is an attribute of secure attachment. So we need to identify somebody who's going to keep that caregiver regulated. So when we're doing this work, we're identifying people with them who will be on their gold list, who will be their supporter. Could be people in their church community, people in a book club, who's going to support them emotionally. And in children's lives, we look for relationships that are going to be important attachment relationships. So let's come back to Justin. So Justin's in seeing me, and he's 8 years old. So let's talk to Justin for a minute. And we'll have Justin talk to you about who was important to me. When I left my foster mother, I knew she was glad I left. She really liked my brother more. You would say she liked him more than me. She tried to be fair, but anytime I wanted a hug or a cuddle, it was like my brother got there first and he pushed me out. And after a while, I was like, I try. And so when I came to my new family, notice he's got executive dysfunction. It was like, why? Try. But then my mom, she started doing rocking time with me every day, and she played with me, and she spent time with me, and she told my brother that he needed to stay off her lap when it was my turn, that she wasn't going to have favorites, and my foster mother had favorites. I wasn't her favorite. But I think I was my grandmother's favorite. And when we were sure that my grandmother was safe, because she divorced, what did you call him, Deborah? Pervert. Yeah, she divorced Pervert. He asked me one time, is there a name for those people, who do bad things to people's private parts and make a movie of them? I said, yeah, it's perverts. He said, I thought so. I thought there'd be a name for it. So he learned that vocabulary word right off. Anyway, he said, I really wanted to see her again because sometimes I'd go stay with her and she'd feed me, and she was really nice. And so we found out where she lived, and I had her come to my house. And when I smelled her, she smelled so good. She's important to me. I'll never forget her. Okay. That would be somebody important in this child's life. Now, when we're going through kids' lives, a lot of times we're tallying up the damage, right? But we also want to find out who can access these positive memories for kids. Do you want everything that this kid remembers in his whole life to be negative? No. And so one of the things that Grandma brought with him was some memory about cute things he did, nice things that he did, thoughtful things that he did. And he also needed some access to those memories too. So I want to find out where there are important attachment relationships and then see if we can open those up in a safe way. And then when we're interviewing kids or moving children, we can find out who's invested and will invest in this child's life in the future. When we're moving kids, we retain these people. We get their phone numbers. We get their pictures. Make sure that these people are kept on board. Okay. And then these are just some slides that show about modalities. We've gone through it. We're blah, blah, blah for kids who want to have fun. Play more. Back to what Carol said. Don't use discipline that promotes attachment. Kids who have been abused will respond better sometimes in the moment to scary practices they're familiar with. Of course, long term, it's like shooting a hole in the bottom of your boat to get the water out. But nevertheless, it's real tempting. But they won't form secure attachments with their parents with that. So we do lots of play. I assign play to my kids. Lots of touch. Time with people who other community members. So sometimes I'll find out who can we rally in this child's life who will be a stakeholder. So like one boy who was just circling the drain. He had so much trauma, and he was trying to process and keep his head above water. His adoptive mother had become clinically depressed. Another child entered the family unexpectedly by birth, kind of overloaded the family. So we found 10 people who could call this kid and encourage him or else visit. It was just the world to him. Much more active participation with grandparents. And we actually spend a lot of time relating, which means we spend a lot of time figuring out what the parents aren't going to do anymore. We help the parents figure out what their modalities are for connection, kinesthetic, speech, visual, expressions, eating together, smell, shared experiences. How can we up that? And what can we overlap that's the child? Because a lot of times the primary sensory modalities that we connect with are different than the child's. So we have to move that to one that overlaps their sensory modalities. Okay. So back to these lessons from the AAI. We find people with a secure state of mind towards attachment. And there's a study that was done by Bates and Dozier. We found that therapists who have a secure state of mind towards attachment, doesn't matter what therapy they're using, their clients connect with them more. They get better more. And it's because we postulate that we feel that the clients feel that they can rely on that therapist's lessons of attunement, their ability to connect, because the therapists themselves have more confidence in that. I can regulate you and bring you into my own regulation. We find that with parents too. If we can keep them steady, they've got this kind of solidity about them. The AI questions probe for information like, was there a time you were afraid of your attachment figure, and so forth. How did that shape your childhood? How does it affect you today? How have you come to understand it today? Because as we resolve those issues, many times we actually are forced by kids entering homes to resolve it to a higher level. We can work towards security because it's a pattern of attachment. Many times we're not encouraging foster parents to attach. But as long as we do that, we're teaching kids don't attach to anybody. And that's exactly the wrong lesson that we want to do it. And when we move children, we need to do it with slower transitions and actually transfer attachments. So I'm going to security attachments teach kids that my parents come back. They're reliable. Later, teachers are reliable. I'm worth coming back to. I'm kind of an emotional person. And one time I said something to my husband. He said, "Oh, yeah, when you get mad at me, you keep your mouth shut, but I can see it like a printout in your brain." I said, "What are you reading?" He said, "I will divorce you." I said, because I was interested, I said, "Doesn't that ever shake you?" Because I work with clients, a little bit of threat of abandonment, just, they're really activated. He said, I know that when you calm down and put it into perspective, you'll think of what a wonderful guy I am. And he is, And he's not a narcissist, he's a really great guy. And I said, well, that's just such a gift. Well, did I give him that gift? No, his Italian mama gave that to him. "Oh, you are such a good baby, You're worth coming back to." But it's the sense of you're valued for the rest of your life. When you can build this back into a kid, how do you think they feel about themselves? They're worth something. They don't have to take just anything. If you take a vulnerable person, and they look pretty good from the outside, but they've had histories of abandonment, and you really want to get them activated, all you have to do is threaten to leave them. And what are they doing? They're chasing you down the street. Do you ever wonder why such otherwise really well put together people will follow such schmucks and make such a bad deal in life for themselves? It's part of this. But if you can get them to calm into that and really have a sense of value of themselves, and I work a lot with teens around this, you're going to feel sometimes that when people reject you or they say they're going to leave you in a relationship, that you've got to follow them because you really need that. I said, instead, you want to look for those people who are true friends, who really know how to value you, who really know how to reflect back to you your worth, and who are looking out for your good. Those are the people you want to hang out with. You don't follow that first impulse, and we practice that. So, yes, when you have a secure attachment, you tend to want to please your parents more of the time. You can be sitting, working with kids who are not attached in a positive, secure way to you, and consequencing with if then, when then statements till the cows come home. But it's always, you're trying to get in there and get them to do the right thing. And you've got contingency plans and a 10-point model you're trying to work out of. But what you really want to be doing is have kids who are part of the social network again, don't you? People who are buying in to, let's work on this together, you and I, because it just so pleases me when you go my way. And I want to figure out how it can go your way too. You see how that goes? But I take very seriously not going too deep, talking about too much, making them feel too bad. We make sure we're always adding in some resource. Do you notice how we keep on building that whole concept of attachment relationships help you feel safe, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. For a lot of the families, I want to have daily comforting rituals. Notice in the body, we spend time lying down around together, relaxing. We spend time admiring each other. We are such a great family. It's such a privilege to be a member of this. Or if you have teens, they can be in group care, and you give yourself a special name that's a victorious name and say, my job is to notice what you're good at, notice what you're best at, teach you how to calm down or make plans or be a success in life, and be valued and value people who are really going to stand up and be there for you. Okay. Have fun experiences that make you think about what the other person is thinking. So that they can start making guesses about people's motivations, their state of mind. Okay. And a big one, keeping on, keeping on. Many of the kids will respond if we just give them a little extra time. I loved what our speaker this morning was talking about. Many of the kids are just slower processors. Well, how many of you are out there just knocking them down sometimes? Do you ever come home after the end of a day and somebody asks you a question and the thought is very slowly migrating through your disheveled sensorium, and it's going to come. They say, do you hear me? I'm thinking slowly, but I'm thinking, just give me some time. And that's what many of the kids need in terms of our approaches, their thoughtfulness, just a little bit more time. And if you can have that relaxed attitude, that open attitude, it's fine. Another thing they need is permission to love without having to lose again. Sometimes kids if you were a child and you thought you were going to lose that puppy, how would you feel the next time, about loving that puppy? Maybe you'd feel okay about loving the puppy for as long as you had it, maybe not. But if you had 4 puppies in a row and you lost each one of them, do you think you'd keep loving that puppy? No, so when kids come in, we have to make some promises to them, if we can keep them, about how long they're going to stay there. And that's one of the interesting things about our population is they do very well with commitment. Barth has looked at what causes kids to get destabilized. And Bird and her group have looked at that too. When parents actually make a strong commitment and keep it, that's what kids get stabilized with. And I don't say to kids, there's nothing you could do in this family that would cause you to have to leave. Because it's not true, is it? There are things none of us can live with. It's just, safety is always primary. But when I have kids who want to press that, I bring out the Sunset magazine for a few of them. These would be some of the younger kids and say, yes, there are some things that you can do that would leave the family. And if you look at the back pages of this book, I hate to tell you, but these are some places that you can go and get some help. I think you can turn back from that, but if you really need to go and get that help there, after you learn it, guess where you go? And they'll guess a former foster parent, maybe back to their birth parent, maybe back to another country. If they're from another country, I said, nah, you come back home to mom and dad. So, basically you can learn it here from me in the privacy of my office without an international trip and a lot of money spent. Or you can go there and then come home and apply it here. I'd rather you stay here because I see that you've got some problems, but I think you're a very lovable person. So we kind of go that route with it. And that seems, just that solid commitment. And some of the kids say kind of like, oh, shucks, I'd rather stay here than if that's the alternative. Often kids see themselves as ineffectual if they could not prevent separation or trauma. So basically, they take responsibility for all the bad things that happen, but then they don't want to take responsibility for anything that's happened now. They've got that kind of reversed. So we do a lot of work with them about, no, they couldn't take responsibility for what happened before, but they really do need to take responsibility for some things in their present time. And I know it's going to take time for some of the attachments, so we put that time in. So are these kids going to be fixed in a year? Well, look at some of you. I'm sorry, but many of us are lifelong projects here. Welcome to the human condition. So, I have an imperfect family that I love dearly, and most of the time we're extremely happy. We have many moderate flaws and probably a few serious ones. It's not that we don't work on it, but that's not all that we're thinking of. When you walk around in life, do you want people who are always pointing out what your new problem is? No. It makes you feel kind of bad, doesn't it? So maybe we'd want to work on 1 or 2 at a time. And most of the time, just enjoy life a little bit more. What helps people move into new secure patterns? Research out new secure-based relationships, working through grief and trauma with support and decreasing stress. This is people across the lifespan. So see, we're working on those areas. So when we're working for children's benefits, going to put some structure in for kids. So these are things that we can see in our court orders, our plans for kids, and so forth. Writing and wording. This child will be placed within a foster adopt home when the abuse neglect is severe. So when you're seeing a case and the abuse and neglect is severe, you can kind of look how much risk are we going to go through here. Ask for the child in a court order to go into a foster adopt home. Or this child will not be moved with less than a 2-week transition. This transition will include at least 5 visits, 2 of which will be overnight visits. You can write that into your court orders and begin asking for it. This child will have photo visits, birth parents, foster parents, school friends, and siblings. These are ways we can honor attachments. This child's case will be referred to a private agency for placement within 3 months of termination of parental rights if there isn't a placement found in the public system. When I talk to the private agencies, I find that often they have placements that, for younger children, but it will take them a very long time to get the request, and by that time maybe parents were saying, gee, we were really looking for a younger child. So those are things that we can start to think about doing. It's not that I am disaffected with public system, but I think if we work together, we get more opportunities for kids. For social workers or people working as CASAs, these are some things we can ask for. This child will have the following information covered in the last session with birth parents. What were the parents' dreams for her? A lot of times we come up with all the ways in which the birth parents have kind of messed up. But something that's important for us to recognize is these children will be remembering the birth parents at all kinds of important occasions. Who do you think the child will think of the day she gets married or he gets married? All the people who are important to them, including the birth parents. How about when they're pregnant? How about when they graduate from high school? How about when they hit their first serious relationship? And so what you want to have are powerful, forgiving figures, even if they don't have continuing contact, who thought the best for them. So what were the parents' dreams for her? Does the parent expect to keep loving her? A lot of times kids think, well, I'm so mad at her. She probably gets it, and she's mad at me, and she'd like to get me back. Or often they were, it was such a violent home that there was some reality to that. So you can get some things covered in that last session that helps neutralize some of the negative effect of this. What talents or interests in this child does the parent see emerging? One of the areas of mastery or one of the areas of resilience, as I mentioned before, is mastery. So what things do we see emerging? I was talking to a birth parent recently, and we were talking about her son, methamphetamine exposed, but doing really well in some areas, really can put things together, and just shows some finesse in repair. He's repairing computers. He builds things outside. And she said, well, actually, his uncle has a contractor and has built many houses. He's really a wonderful contractor, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that interest emerging. Doesn't that make you feel good to know that you've got something in your DNA that turned out to not be involved with the criminal justice system or, loss or grief or terrible experiences? How tall would the parent expect him to be? For girls and boys, these are really important pieces of identity information. Well, this one child was being readied for his last visit with his birth mother, and the birth mother would never tell the dad's name anyway, or anything about him. And so this kid asked, he said, this is the last time I'm going to see you. And Deborah Gray told me I could ask you, how tall was my birth father? And she leaned over and she whispered to him what his birth father's name was and said, he was 6'4". You could play football or basketball if you wanted to. I mean, this was a real uptick for this kid. It's so much better than, just this shadow out there. Were the women in the family early, medium, or late developers? This is of real interest for girls, right? And some of their parents, too. How much time do we have before the hormones hit? Do the birth parents give permission for this child to receive just as much love as any other child? Because many kids feel like they're being disloyal if they love. And if we can get permission for them to get just as much love for as any other child, it really helps with attachment. Does the birth parent give permission for this child to go on to be happy in life? And I've written letters like this to prisons, and the birth parent writes back and says, yes, it would break my heart if this child didn't have a happy life. You know, I hope she does or he does. Will the birth parent try to take good care of herself so the child does not worry so much? You know, that's something you can ask. And how does the birth parent most want to be remembered? In other words, do you notice how you're pulling up some good out of this? Do not require the foster adoptive parents to bring children into situations that terrify them. You know, because it's like any bad horror or any horror movie. When you finally feel you're safe, then you're brought back into a situation of terror. I had one child who was just doing horribly in the visit. I said, take her heart rate, her resting heart rate. It was 155 beats per minute. She was terrified, speechless. Why would she be in that situation for visitation? And they went in with a court order. And then I'll show you a little tape of Justin. I'm going to put him at the very end because the slideshow will go dark. I'm just sure of it. But we are on a learning curve here, and you're actually a very wonderful audience. These are, in the final scheme of things, very minor blips for a conference. Anyway, but you know, but with Justin, he was having such extreme duress that God lover Mary Ann Curran went in and asked for a hearing with the judge and the cousin and said, we don't know what the problem is, but he is so off track after the visits. You know, we would like to call him to a halt. And the judge did so. And finally, he could be relaxed. Judges and CASAs can ask about children's reactions. What's the reaction to the visitation? A lot of times the kids are just like running around and they're all frenetic and so forth. We actually have to do some interviewing, you know, with the kids that's substantive. Recognize that children get weaker with each new trauma. So when we don't have very much resourcing kids, we really have to limit how many traumas we expose them to. They are special needs kids. And there are times where we can't go. There's just no more opportunity for them to withstand the traumas in their lives. Almost all serious genetic disorders are triggered, or mental health genetic disorders are triggered after a series of dysregulations. And we already have a group of kids who are very prone to genetic problems in the area of genetic mood disorders. So each time we have one of these big hits, move, you know, a trauma, it's another dysregulating experience for them, and we run greater the risk of what's in the DNA to actually be expressed. And so, you know, that's one reason why we're having such high rates of early bipolar and you know, major affective disorders in these kids. And so we really have to watch that. When I talk to the neurobiologists, they're just horrified at what we do to kids in the child welfare system. When placing with relatives, find out prior to the placement whether that home has a history of domestic violence. Don't place children in such homes. If mom has a boyfriend, get a criminal history check on him and check out what the level of violence is in the home and get him to do some things to really stand up and be in or out. You know, don't just let him be on the periphery. And that being said, Sroof's done a 30-year study in which he's looked at long-term, medium-risk group for attachment. Some of the people became high risk, some low risk. They said to him, if you could give the kids in your study one thing, what would it be? He said, fathers. You know, fathers. And many of the people who went on and formed secure attachments when their attachments were not secure in the beginning did so because they finally latched on to some guy who provided more resources, more stability, could steady down the mom so she wasn't in it so much by herself. And then she could provide some security to the child. So it's not like I'm saying, don't have those relationships. It's just you have to look at them with a knowledgeable eye. And then practically look at the overall demands of the family. Can the family mobilize the energy to attach to this attachment-resistant, dysregulated child if you simultaneously order 3 visits a week during nap time? So that's the balance. Sure, it's nice to have lots of the visits, but watch and see what you're doing to the total family, okay? And don't keep placing sibling groups together when it will be a stretch for any one family to meet the needs of even one child of that sibling group. Sometimes people have moved kids 3-4 times just to keep the sibling group together. We have one child whose behaviors are so difficult that the other child has to keep bumping along, moving with them. Sometimes we just try to get them close by, because if you look at what are the cues that we give people, if we have a child who's constantly don't attach, what does that signal to the other child? Yeah. Be particularly aware that sexually abused siblings will be acting out. Make plans accordingly so there's line of sight supervision. When I see the kids who aren't doing very well, it's often because the kids continue to be, sexually abusing each other, and they keep themselves really activated. So you don't want to place so many kids in the home that this is impossible, or either that or it becomes very institutional. About 30% of the parents nationwide now are single parents. Respite and resources will often save the day. And for most of our parents, in order to regain their regulation, they're going to have some respite. After severe neglect, half those children with normal cognitive scores will have significant processing problems. Give parents a primer on the educational system. Make sure they know how to do IEPs. The average child in Washington State who's been through our foster care system is a full 2 years behind in education by 8th grade. Around 60 to 70% of children prenatally exposed will have ADD or ADHD, and that's prenatally exposed to alcohol or substance. After meth exposure and marijuana exposure, attentional problems and behavioral problems are to be expected. So don't wait to see if something develops. Get in and get some early intervention. Get a good neuropsych assessment that really looks at how is this child processing, and get therapy. But therapy that starts with some attachment work so there's some resource and then moves on to the higher levels. Have judges write in to the court order that this child will receive counseling from a person with expertise in trauma who will not be an intern. You can ask CASAS to recommend this. Or if parents are not able to parent because of successive traumas and grief, see if the parents can get therapy. And that is the end of that slide set. I think when we're working with these kids, that one of the things that we do is we also download our hope or our loss of hope. I think it's really important for us to find some things that we can do that really make a difference, stick to them doggedly, and then to pass that hope on to kids. And so I pass that on to you. I thank you for the work that you're doing, and I thank you for being such a terrific audience here today. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks.